Now, the other night, and after having watched the first 5 episodes of The Acolyte now and being less than impressed with it thus far, I decided to grab the Darth Plagueis novel off the shelf and to sit down and to give it a read for the first time for the first time in roughly 12 years since it first came out. And it was while reading just the first few chapters, which already start to delve into some of the history and philosophy of the Sith, but it was while reading just the very beginning of the book that I kind of figured out what my biggest problem with the Acolyte just might be, or biggest problem with it in concept or theory, beyond the execution of the show itself, whether or not it is well written, or well directed, or well created, basically. And that is that I'd like a show that actually is about the Sith, or is truly told from their point of view or perspective. Not whatever this show is about, or whoever or whatever this guy may or may not be, Sith or not. Not a show that is so vague and tries to dance around everything so much in an attempt to be mysterious, or to be an actual mystery, I guess, that the only mystery I'm trying to figure out is why exactly should I care about any of these characters or these events? The entire show keeps telling me or saying to me that I just need to keep holding on. Even other fans tell me I just need to keep holding on because the ending is going to make it good or something. But I need to keep holding on, and eventually we will find out what actually happened that fateful night 16 years ago. We will find out, or so my guess is, that both the Jedi and Qimir, the dark side, I'm maybe a Sith guy, that they were both there, and they were both there to take away the twins, that both, in a way, are responsible for what happened. I can't help but try to connect the dots here, and to see that what I think the whole point of the show is going to be, the point it is going to try to make if you choose to swallow it or not, is that the witches are simply innocent. They are simply trying to exist as they wanted to exist, to live how they wanted to live. They weren't hurting anybody, and they were just doing their thing, minding their own business. And the two extremes, the Jedi and the Sith, or the Sith wannabe, they showed up and interfered in their affairs, in their lives, in an effort to further their own agendas, and that got them all killed. That got the witches killed. And then after the witches were kind of out of the way, each of them took one of the twins, both the Jedi and the Sith took a twin, and lied to them in order to get them to join their side. And thus you're supposed to believe or come to the conclusion that both sides shouldn't exist, and if they didn't, maybe everything would just be better in the galaxy. That's my guess for the message of the show, or what the mystery will ultimately say. That the Jedi being so strict with how the Force should be used then creates responses, or those who respond, those like the Sith, they create the opposite extreme, and then the two sides fight and people get caught up in the middle and suffer and die. And yeah, that's not the first time we've seen that kind of brought up in Star Wars before. However, the reality is the Sith exist because of their own greed and bad choices, their own wants and desires. They are or become the very epitome of selfishness and crave power above all else because they have taken that path. They have taken the dark path willingly, and thus have been twisted or corrupted by the dark side of the Force into what they are. And again, it happens because of their own wants and desires and their own failings, not because the Jedi are too strict. And I really feel like, and I've talked about this a lot lately, but there should never be a justification for doing evil, especially made in Star Wars. And blaming the Jedi for the existence of the Sith would almost be like blaming the existence of criminals on the formation of laws. And so what I'd really love to see, and what I was kinda hoping this show just might somehow be, was something that again shows us things from the side of the Sith, that truly digs into their beliefs and how they operate, that shows their inner workings and what they were up to at this point in time. Some 100 years before the prequels and before Palpatine put his master plan into motion and conquered the galaxy for a time. I was really hoping this would show the inherent flaws of the Sith, the inherent flaws of being evil, that nothing good comes of it. I was hoping this would somehow sort of be a worthy prelude of the Plagueis novel. Or maybe in some way it would take some of the ideas from it and do something interesting with them. Because, make no mistake, the Plagueis novel does not paint the Sith in a sympathetic way. It shows them for all their cruelty and makes them out to be the villains they truly are. I guess what I'm saying is I wanted to see the real Sith operating in the shadows and doing the nefarious things that they do, And maybe at some point they risk discovery for some reason, and a Jedi catches wind of them and they have to kill the Jedi before they can get back to the Council and reporting the return of the Sith. And right in the very first chapter of the Plagueis novel, he talks about, or Plagueis recalls, how there are other Sith in the galaxy, or others that call themselves Sith and that are hiding in the shadows as well, but they do not come directly from the line of Bane like he does, and thus are little more than pretenders to him. And I can't help but feel like that's exactly what Qimir basically is, or ultimately will be. That no, he's not a real Sith, he's a pretender, and that's how the Jedi will see this whole situation, assuming anyone even lives to tell the tale. They'll feel that since this wasn't a real Sith, that there's nothing to be concerned about. And I mean, it's a shame no other Sith, no other real Sith, knew it'd be just that easy, that all they had to do to avoid discovery, or if they were discovered, was to say, I'm not a Sith, I'm something else, and the Jedi wouldn't care as much. Not to mention, yeah, it has been, at the time of the Acolyte, 900 years since the Jedi last saw the Sith. So, yeah, who knows? There's a good chance they don't call themselves the Sith anymore. That they've done a bit of rebranding. The epitome of the dark side has a new name. That in the nearly 1,000 years, some other dark side faction with, again, a new name, just as bad as the Sith, has come around. Which, as I've tried to argue many, many times before, I know, but that is the whole point of that line from Ki-Adi-Mundi in The Phantom Menace, that it is trying to make for the story. It's trying to tell us that the Jedi have not seen the Sith, or anything like them, anything as well-trained or as powerful as one of them in 1,000 years. I swear some people get so deep into Star Wars itself at times, into the nitty-gritty details, that they can't take a step back and understand that oftentimes lines in a story have meaning, again, for the actual story. Or we're supposed to take something away from the line in order to understand the story, not just think of this as what this guy happens to be saying right now. And the Ki-Adi-Mundi line is absolutely one of those times. It's one of those times when something is being conveyed to us for the story that we need to understand the story. Something that is massively important. That was George Lucas's way of telling us, the audience, that the reason why the Jedi are so complacent right now is because nothing has really challenged them, or close to it, in 1,000 years. That's what you're supposed to take away from that line. Not that, well, he only said Sith, so maybe there's been Dark Jedi or something else really bad that weren't actually technically Sith. Or that maybe Ki-Adi-Mundi is lying or part of a cover-up. After all, he is wrong. The Sith are actually back, so maybe the Jedi have known all along and are hiding it for reasons. And again, what that line is really trying to tell us is that yes, the Jedi are indeed wrong. That is the whole point. They don't know or have any clue that the Sith have returned. That they have been hidden so well these past 1,000 years that the Jedi have been lulled to sleep. Not that they've seen signs as recently as 100 years ago about their possible return and shrugged their shoulders at it. One of the key points Lucas is trying to make with the Jedi in the prequels for the story is that good must always remain vigilant. Even when it doesn't seem like evil is about, you must always be ready for it to return, because it will always return. It is just a matter of time. And sometimes it is a really long time, and you can gain a false sense of security or confidence, and that is when you let your guard down, and that is when evil sneaks back in. That it waits for that moment. It waits for good to let its guard down before it defeats it. And so the best way to not be defeated by evil, or one of the best ways, or how to begin to not be defeated by evil, is to not let your guard down like the Jedi did in the prequels. This is what you are supposed to take away from the story of those films, that the Jedi are the good guys and they got too full of themselves. They thought they had defeated evil for good, and when that became their mindset, they had already lost. You're not supposed to watch those films and think something ridiculous like, well, if the Jedi didn't exist, would evil ever come about again because the Jedi and their oppression or strict laws about the Force usage or something, that's actually responsible for evil coming about. It's because they try to tell others how to use the Force, or that they can't use the Force, that they have to respond, and that response is justified in some respect. You're not supposed to hear Ki-Adi-Mundi's line in The Phantom Menace and now think to yourself that, oh, I know this is actually part of the cover-up. He's actually lying here. The vain Jedi were so worried about their image that they covered up or were willfully ignorant of signs of the return of the Sith, or the return of some type of powerful and well-trained dark side user, that they should have or maybe did see the return of evil coming, but they turned a blind eye to it. And to be honest and blunt with you, it's kind of sad and depressing even how many Star Wars fans don't seem to care about the integrity of the story itself. Or maybe don't even entirely get what the story of Star Wars is even all about, or don't know or care about the messages that they're trying to say to them. That instead of taking something away from Star Wars, they instead treat it too much like this factual history that they, in a sense, miss the forest for the trees. That they don't care if the Jedi are made to look bad, if that's what quote-unquote really happened in the galaxy far, far away. That is the real history of it, instead of just realizing this is supposed to be a story. And don't get me wrong, I do like and can get lost in the details or lost in the weeds myself. I like knowing all the small stuff about Star Wars too. I like, in a sense, kind of treating it like a real history and immersing myself in it as if it were. And not every single Star Wars show or movie or book or whatever it might be has to touch on the core themes perfectly. Some can be frivolous, fun tales of adventure, if you will. But I care more about the themes and the messages than that. I care more about the story itself and what it says more than anything else. More than, isn't it cool to know this little detail? And so the reason why I'd love to get a show about the Sith is because, yeah, for one, it would be cool. I do love the Sith as a story element, don't get me wrong. But for another, I'd love it to ultimately show how there is nothing redeeming about them. There is not one good thing about the Sith or about embracing the dark side and becoming the epitome of evil. I don't read the Plagueis novel and come to the conclusion that, oh, the Sith have some really good points. Maybe they're not so bad after all. And yes, as I was just kind of saying, we can certainly find them cool, or however you want to word it. I know plenty of people out there love Darth Vader, not because they in any way agree with him or condone his actions, but because we do like a cool looking and a cool villain in general. My point here is simply, I don't really want Star Wars shows that call into question if evil isn't really evil, or if it's not really all that bad. Not that you can't do it in a clever way where ultimately you realize that yes, evil is bad, the justifications the Sith may try to make for their existence all fall flat, or are empty and only try to hide the fact that they only care about themselves. I'm not saying you can't do something like that ever. Certainly you can, and certainly it could be really, really good. But if I'm right about this show, if I'm right about the Acolyte, and the point it tries to make is that the Jedi are responsible for evil, well then they're missing the whole point of Star Wars. And it's not Star Wars anymore, it's just the fictional history of a galaxy far, far away. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about all this. Do you think some people get kind of lost in the details of Star Wars? So much so that they kind of take Star Wars too seriously, that they then miss the point of the story, they miss what Star Wars is actually trying to say to them. Whatever you think about it, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.